Hey everyone, I'm Seth Goldfarb, and this presentation is called The Landscape of Decentralization. A little bit about myself: I'm a writer, and I've spent the last few years helping businesses tell better stories about blockchain and its applications. I currently work for Binance US, which is the US arm of Binance. They're the world's largest cryptocurrency exchange. I've previously written for Evernym, who's very involved in developing self-sovereign identity. I've worked for a number of companies uh, involved in developing decentralized financial applications and a couple of crypto news sites as well. So with this broad range of experiences, what I'm going to be sharing today is an introduction to the industry developing blockchain and distributed ledger technologies. I'll provide a few different ways of thinking about what's going on in different parts of the industry to help you start thinking about where you might want to look for jobs, and provide a few tips and tricks on how to get a job and get started in the industry. So with that, I'll share my screen and we can get started. All right. Throughout this presentation, I'll be covering what decentralization is and why different companies use blockchain in the different applications that they're working on. Then I'll talk about the landscape of decentralization and introduce some of the companies that are making decentralized technologies. We'll talk about the different DeFi asset classes to introduce you to sort of give you a sense of the different areas that people are working in within the area of decentralized finance. And then we'll move on to talk about how to find employment, and I'll provide some tips for success, what I've found useful throughout my experience. So what is decentralization? Most of us are fortunate enough that privacy tends to be a relatively minor issue in our day-to-day lives. We may be unfortunate enough to deal with things like identity theft from time to time, but typically, recovering or canceling your cars, recovering money tends to be fairly straightforward. Um, the main point I'm trying to make is that it's rarely a matter of life or death. For certain people in extreme situations, privacy may be legally compelled, or it may even be a matter of life and death. So for those who truly need privacy, finding it can be increasingly difficult to come by. To take a lighter example, if I'm running a business and just need to keep my information hidden from Google for whatever reason, I couldn't just use Google Slides to prepare my presentations. I actually have to go pretty far out of my way to buy the right hardware and implement the systems necessary to maintain data privacy, and also be able to access that data. If I'm away from the office, I might still need to be able to access it, but if I can't host that data on Amazon's servers, for example, because I have that level of privacy requirements, then obviously that requires a lot of extra work. So decentralization isn't specifically about privacy, but it is about building technologies that enable privacy by remaining as agnostic as possible about who can use them. And what that means is that it's about building technologies that give people access to services without allowing gatekeepers like governments, web infrastructure providers, and software developers to censor that activity. So for those for which privacy truly matters, decentralization is a movement building technologies to serve their needs. So why do companies use blockchain? What's the appropriate way to use blockchain? There's a lot of innovation theater, which is a great term I've learned over the past few years, where companies will create projects not because they actually make use of the unique properties of a new technology, but just to showcase that they are playing with it and impress their customers. So when you're looking at companies using blockchain, here's the legitimate reasons that they want to do so, I primarily revolve around censorship resistance, as we just discussed. And the way that's enabled is by enabling scarcity in digital assets. So before blockchain, before the invention of Bitcoin, proof of work consensus, um, if you wanted to replicate a piece of data on the internet, that was fairly easy. And in a lot of cases outside of cryptocurrency, that remains fairly easy. If you've ever dealt with phishing emails, that's an easy example where of how easy it is to replicate someone else's data and impersonate them and use that in nefarious ways. So with blockchain, we now have the ability to create scarcity in terms of digital assets. So if, say, your bank were to create a unique piece of, hold a unique cryptocurrency or, a token, they could use that to prove that they could use that as a way of showing you that they hold something that nobody else in the world can hold. And what this does is unlock a lot of new ways to exchange value. So that's going to be a theme throughout this presentation. As we're discussing the companies that are working on the application side specifically. So what we're really looking for are individuals. When we're using blockchain, what we're really looking for are opportunities to bring together groups of individuals and or organizations with competing interests to coordinate mutually beneficial interactions. So with every application of distributed ledger technology, the common denominator is the use of it to replace trust in a centralized authority with trust in the reliability of this technology. So with that, let's talk about the landscape of decentralization. So here we have a number of companies in the space. Here we have a number of companies in the space categorized by how focused they are on decentralization and whether or not they're more focused on developing infrastructure for decentralized technologies or actually developing decentralized applications themselves. So as a potential employee of a company in this industry, working in a startup versus working in enterprise can lead to very different experiences. Just to throw it out there, if you're more interested in working on decentralized technologies, that tends to fall more into the realm of the startup world, whereas enterprise is where you find companies that are experimenting with more relatively centralized applications. It's important to remember that centralization and decentralization exist on a spectrum. It's not simply a matter of black and white. And what makes companies more or less decentralized really falls down to a couple of things. One, the technologies that they're working on. So, for example, MakerDAO in the bottom right corner is a perfect example. They have produced something called a stable coin, which is a cryptocurrency whose value is pegged to the US dollar. And the way that you make this stable coin called DAI is by locking up Ether in a smart contract that maintains a collateralization ratio. So it keeps the system over keeps the system over collateralized to ensure that there's always enough money in the system to back the value of the stable coin that's out in circulation. So, there's a programmatic way of preventing a bank run on the system. So MakerDAO, we would say, is very, very decentralized, not only because this technology is obviously operating in a very decentralized realm, but their governance as a company is also very decentralized. So there are a couple of legal incorporated organizations that help develop the technology and fund companies that are working on the technologies associated with this. But is essentially a decentralized project, meaning that, if you wanted to form a small group or even work yourself, start working on the project yourself, you can get in contact with a group, and there's a process for contributing. So that's why that's in the far right quadrant. So more on the infrastructure side, you have wallet providers, development service, dev tooling and dev service providers like Truffle. Etherscan is a block explorer that provides information about what's going on in the Ethereum blockchain. That's a relatively decentralized tool that anyone can use. Chainalysis over on the left side basically is a company that takes the sort of information provided by Etherscan and does all kinds of complicated analysis on it to provide insights to governments and organizations who are interested in analyzing what's going on chain or on various blockchains. So that's in the, So moving over to the centralized infrastructure, you have hardware providers like AMD and Ledger. AMD provides the GPUs and essentially mining equipment used to power the proof of work algorithm behind Bitcoin and other proof of work cryptocurrencies. Ledger is a hardware wallet that people use to store their cryptocurrencies. Moving down to the field of centralized applications, you get more into the realm of identity, supply chain. Sovereign is a network, a public network dedicated to providing a public utility for decentralized identity. Everledger and TraderLens are associated with supply chain solutions. So is the IBM Food Trust. I believe Wirex is a remittance service, but I might be misremembering that. So please forgive me if so. And back to decentralized applications, we already talked about MakerDAO. You have groups like Metacartel who are decentralized groups of people who provide funding to organizations working on decentralized technologies. Set is a fairly interesting application in that it allows you to create cryptocurrencies that represent multiple cryptocurrencies or that use different cryptocurrencies in different ways according to however you want to program it. So if you're a trader and you want to trade between two assets according to a certain indicator, you can use Set to build a token that will automatically do that for you without you having to touch it. And Gods Unchained is another cool one to check out. That's a trading card game that uses non-fungible tokens to give players ownership of the trading cards. So as I said before, for people looking to get a job in the industry, it's worth considering if you're someone who likes the structure of working in a big business, a more corporate environment, then maybe finding a job on looking more towards the centralized businesses or perhaps infrastructure is where you want to be at. If you're looking to take the plunge into the startup world, decentralized applications are going to tend to be more in the realm of where you're going to want to look. Some of the popular applications, we've already talked about a lot of these. So in the startup world, you've got on the infrastructure in the startup world, on the infrastructure side, you could work as a core developer for a project like Bitcoin or Ethereum. There are Web3 projects, which is basically a way of referring to the development of decentralized internet. So Etherscan, we already talked about the Ethereum Block Explorer. MetaMask is a digital wallet that allows you to interact with Web3 applications. I believe they have a few team members locally. I could be wrong about that. And there's also, of course, news sites. It's, as I said, it's important to maintain communication within the community. When, as someone who was around in 2017, when there's a lot of craziness going on due to ICOs and things like that, I found a lot of projects working on really similar things, and so I think that news sites are a really helpful resource for connecting people who are working on similar things, getting out the news about new projects. If you're interested in working more on the application side, decentralized finance and gaming are really where the action is. So for enterprise, if you're interested in working on enterprise infrastructure, you have, again, developer mining tools, companies providing blockchain as a service, or managed blockchain services, and companies providing analytics on both the industry and what's going on in blockchains themselves. The enterprise side of applications, or that application side of enterprise rather, there's companies working on finance, financial applications. Mostly in this realm, you'll find remittance, companies working on remittances, on-off ramps for exchanging cryptocurrency and fiat currencies, and stable coins like Tether, which, unlike MakerDAO, just kind of like a bank, you give them $100,000, they give you $100,000 in Tether, that's that. If you're an exchange, that's useful because traders like trading with stable coins. Companies working on self-sovereign identity. We've already discussed a little bit. This is about giving people control over their digital credentials, and supply chain solutions aimed at helping companies along the supply chain reduce their reliance on banks. So to talk about the DeFi asset classes, I came up with it. The way I came up with this was by researching, when I was looking into traditional asset classes, or how people think about asset classes in the traditional world of finance. The simplest way is through 4 asset classes. There's different ways of dividing it up. I've seen systems that say there are 7 asset classes, but for the sake of simplicity, I think this is a helpful framework. So you have money market and cash equivalents, which are essentially just ways of accounting for value. So when you talk about cryptocurrency, Bitcoin is probably the first thing that comes to mind, but there are different cryptocurrencies that aim to enable privacy, some that aim to be more sustainable than Bitcoin. So in the same way that there's a lot of different products in the money market and different types of cash, there's a lot of different types of cryptocurrency out there. Moving on to fixed income and debt, we're basically talking about debt-based financial instruments here. Going back to the MakerDAO, as we described earlier, that's where decentralized lending comes in. You have opportunities to basically deposit Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Ether, into accounts that allow you to take out other cryptocurrencies that have their own value. So you still have access to, the Bitcoin or Ether that you deposited into that account, but you now also have this other asset. So there's some debt there. Then we can talk about So that's debt-based financial instruments. Then we can talk about equity-based financial instruments. So instead of taking debt in something, you're giving away equity in, say, a business. So the correlation here in the decentralized world would be something called security tokens, which are essentially just tokenized stocks. Project I'm currently working on actually used we've tokenized the equity in our project. There's 4 members, and we each hold a corresponding amount of tokens with the amount of equity that we hold in the business. And we used a company that allowed us to, excuse me. Yeah, we worked with a company that's come up with a legal framework so that our company, the equity in our company is legally represented by these tokens. And the last asset class is tangible goods, real estate. The corollary in the decentralized world would be non-fungible tokens. Non-fungible tokens are a special type of cryptocurrency that can't be broken down into smaller pieces. So, Bitcoin has a whole lot of decimals behind it. You'll see a lot of times. You can buy like 0.002 of Bitcoin if you want to. Non-fungible tokens, the idea is that one token is one token is one token forever. So if you want to take that token and assign it to something or use it to, represent something, say, going back to the gaming example we used earlier, if you have a trading card game, you could have a bunch of tokens that include data that represent trading cards. And each one is unique. People could make other ones that, mimic the data, but still come with unique identifiers so you can tell that it's different from the one that was made before it. So there's a lot of potential there for representing, either representing assets or in the digital world, for creating assets in the digital world, or representing real world assets in the digital world. The reason I bring this up is to give some insight into the different types of applications that the main, at this point, the world of blockchain still very much serves 2 audiences, technical and financial. So if you're not going to go work on dev tooling, or, I'm kind of a rare case as a content creator. A lot of people end up working on, if not code, then at least informing the theory behind the code and how, provide insight to the developers to help them figure out how to create more interesting and novel products, financial products. So if you're looking for a job, here's what I suggest. Whether you're a software developer, if you're a writer like myself, designer, whatever you do, get a portfolio. Having a portfolio speaks way, I don't know. My portfolio has gotten me further than my resume, so I feel like, everybody has a resume, everybody has a LinkedIn. If you really want to stand out, the easiest way is by getting people to look at your portfolio. I personally use GitHub Pages. I have used WordPress in the past. I would advise against WordPress at this point. There's an ad I've been getting recently that actually kind of hits the nail on the head. WordPress is there's just too much. If you need a website with a lot of features, it's great, but for just building a personal website, I would advise against it. GitHub Pages, if you search GitHub, there's a lot of themes that you can just fork and basically copy and paste the data that you want in there. That's essentially what I did with mine. But yeah, there's some very low tech solutions. Wix is even friendlier, especially if you're willing to cough up a few bucks for your domain name and such. It's really easy. Yeah, if you're going to use GitHub Pages, it's easy to just get a domain name from a site like GoDaddy and just point it to, you can set up a redirect so that when people go to that site, it'll take them to the GitHub Pages, or the GitHub Pages will be what shows up. If you really, really want to keep it simple, honestly, for a while, I just kept a Google Sheet with links to all of my publications and just shared that with potential clients. Now I have it displayed a little more, I also have it linked on my website, but I have my stuff displayed in a little prettier way. So those are all options. As far as where to actually go once you have a portfolio and are ready to look for jobs, LinkedIn and Indeed, I think, are still the obvious places, kind of, for any general purpose job search on the internet. But for more specifically for jobs in the blockchain industry, Crypto Jobs List and Crypto.jobs are two sites that I've found pretty useful. If you Google crypto jobs, like there are a handful of websites that come up. These two tend to be more active. So tips for success. For me personally, a lot of my success has come from my flexibility. Being flexible in turn means being open to working in different time zones, being willing to accept cryptocurrency as payment. With that, I will say it's important to learn how to negotiate. If you're going to be accepting cryptocurrency as payment, you're going to have to report that on your taxes, which is going to take some work. And if you're working as a contractor instead of a W-2, you do need to charge more. That was kind of something I had to get my head around for a while. It's, if you're used to making, just throw some numbers out. If you're used to making $60,000 a year as a regular employee, you probably need to charge closer to 90 to 100,000 as a freelancer to make up for paying your own taxes, dealing with any hiccups in your employment. And as I said, if you're willing to accept cryptocurrency, that's something else you may need to factor into your hourly rate. But being flexible also gives you the ability to take advantage of opportunities that other people can't. So, I've come across plenty of jobs that only pay in cryptocurrency, and being able to access those and provide specialized knowledge on this subject is something that's helped me develop my career. As far as interviewing goes, there's something that's really close to me as well. I'm an introvert, naturally an introvert, not someone who's very good at interviewing. There are plenty of people who are skilled at interviewing there are plenty of people who are very skilled at what they do who struggle to find employment because they just don't interview well. And the harsh reality is that there's good hiring managers out there, there's bad hiring managers as well. And interviewing is a skill that some people have and some people don't. And so learning how to do that is key. And the easiest way to do that, to me, is to interview when you don't have to, or if you are in a position where you have to interview anyway, work in a few interviews that you don't plan on taking no matter what, if possible. If you are really in a clinch for time, I understand if you just have to jump in there and do what you got to do. But one of the most helpful things for me has been taking interviews that I had no intention of taking, and just interviewing often to give myself the opportunity to get comfortable with the process and just, accept that I'm going to screw up and get better at it over time. So, if it's something that you take seriously and reflect on and prepare for, then, doing it more is the best way to get better at it. And in terms of working remote, I've done that for the last, been lucky enough to do that for the last 3 years at this point. So haven't had a little bit of experience. Honestly, I know everybody has advice about that, um, given how many people are suddenly working remote right now. But honestly, do whatever works for you. Some people can get stuff done at 2 in the morning and work whatever random amount of hours. Sometimes I can do that. Most of the time I can't. I need to get up at the same time every morning, jump in the shower, and then spend a few hours working. Uh, Whatever you have to do, most people, for most people, if that's what you're used to anyway, stick with what you're used to. Even if you aren't going into the office, do everything else you would do when if you are used to getting a coffee when you go to the office, make yourself a coffee at home before you sit down and try to work. All that's, I don't know, it's easy to fill your head with um, a lot of ideas about what you need to do to get done. But honestly, just like figuring out what works for you and sticking with it has been the way to go for me. If you are freelancing, well, regardless of whether you're freelancing or not, plan regular communications with your team if you're in a management role, at the very least once every couple weeks. If you are freelancing, be prepared to keep your own hours. I have a template, a spreadsheet, spreadsheet template that I keep for that, basic contract, and a template for invoicing. So whenever I take on a new client, I can just copy each of those over and I'm basically ready to go. So yeah, making life easy for yourself and your employee is really the key. And that's it. If you have any questions, I would love to take them. Thank you very much for watching. This is my email. Please feel free to get in touch if you have any questions. Yeah, thank you.